Also like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of tonight's webinar, SiriusXM. And now I will hand things over to Glenna Blackwell.
Oh, thank you, Deb. Welcome, everyone. I'm Glenna Blackwell, an International Board of Directors member and liaison to the webinar committee. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker this evening. Kathy Wadsworth Delano is a New England section and Connecticut Chapter 99's member. Her involvement, accomplishments, and career in the balloon world for over 40 years are just fascinating. We are thrilled to host Kathy here tonight to share her journey with you. Please welcome her. Kathy, we're ready for you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. As Glenna said, I'm Kathy Wadsworth Delano, and I've been I was hot air balloon pilot for 40 years, and I'm going to try to fit the highlights of that into 45 minutes. So bear with me. And Deb's putting up the first of the images now. This is kind of a fanciful drawing of the first hot air balloon that ever flew passengers, and a hot air balloon is the first aircraft that ever flew humans. And I chose this particular image because you can see the two so-called pilots in the donut kind of gondola there, and in the middle underneath the balloon is a huge cauldron full of all kinds of stuff to burn, from paper to shoes to whatever they had an idea was causing the balloon to lift, because they didn't really realize it was just plain old hot air. They thought they needed a lot of extra stuff in there to make it hotter or whatever. So anyway, the first hot air balloon took off in 1783. And it took off from a garden of the Chateau Mouette, and the balloon was called the Mouette. And here it is. It is made of a paper and linen laminate, and it was made by the Montgolfier brothers of Annonay in France, and they were paper manufacturers, and they did a bunch of experimenting before making this really big balloon. In the crowd to watch this balloon take off was Benjamin Franklin. He was a diplomat from the United States at the time, like just the United, 1783, that's it. And Louis the 16th and his lovely wife. So this balloon flew about 25 minutes and got outside of Paris because the pilots had the idea that it would probably be better not to be landing this fiery balloon in Paris. So they got themselves in the outskirts. The two pilots were the Marquis d'Arlan and Pilatre de Rosier, who were noblemen who volunteered to be the pilots. Next. So about a month after the first flight of this hot air balloon with two humans in it came the first gas balloon flight. This is not it, but is kind of a similar kind of arrangement with a net with a balloon inflated inside of it. And that balloon did in the future of the hot air balloon of the time, because that gas, once it was in the balloon, did not have to be heated, nothing had to be done to be able to stay aloft longer. You just had to carry some ballast to keep yourself aloft, and then you would valve off gas from the top of the balloon through a wooden valve. Next photo. And so here we are. I just want to really point out the difference between gas balloons and hot air balloons, because a lot of times people will call a gas balloon a hot air balloon. They're not the same. So this is a balloon that's just about ready to launch. The basket is covered with all the sandbags that helped get the balloon inflated, and most of those will come off before the balloon.
You would really like that.
Go into the air.
Oh, I was turning it down.
So anyway, lost my track of thought there. Okay, so when they take off, there's still sandbags hanging around on the basket, and you can see that bag that's hanging on the side of the basket, and they put one bag of sand dumped into that bag, and while they're flying along, they will use like a sugar scoop to get rid of to put out sand so they can rise. That scoop of sand going out, the balloon will rise 50 feet. So it doesn't take much to have the balloon rise. So throwing over sandbags is not something that happens, because that would really make the balloon rise like a rocket ship. So to valve gas, again, same thing, to come down, you pull on a cord in the basket and it opens a valve in the top of the balloon. Next picture. So this lady here is not the first lady to fly balloons. I mean, between 1793, which is when the first balloon was flown here in the United States, and this time, this is the 1880s, many women did take part in ballooning, but their careers were not long. They made a couple flights and either gave it up or they didn't have a happy ending. And so Mary Myers came onto the scene when she married her husband, Carl, who was already interested in building balloons. And the two of them had quite a career. And she became the sole pilot in the family. And she flew hundreds of flights over just over 10 years. And even when she gave up the exhibition flying that she was doing, she still was a test pilot for her husband. And she set a 20,000 foot record in a balloon, also a gas balloon. They did gas balloons during her time flying. Anyway, on to the next slide. This is one of her husband's experiments. It was called the Sky Cycle, and Mary was one of the test pilots for this. And she actually, I think she ended up flying that thing in New York City out around Governor's Island. She was absolutely an expert on figuring out the winds and how to make a balloon go where she wanted to go. Next. And this is the balloon farm of the Myerses out near Herkimer, New York. And they always had balloons either half inflated or being inflated on the property. They built all their own stuff, designed everything, and did a lot of innovation, especially for fabric sealing, because they were using gas. Next slide. This wild lady here is Mary Frances Allen. Oops. And she married into the famous Allen balloon family of Rhode Island. And that family, the gentlemen were the ones that got the whole thing going. They had been Civil War balloon pilots. And when they came back to Rhode Island, they kept going at it. They also built all their own balloons, and they were kind of contemporaries of Mary and Carl Myers. And Mary wasn't the only Allen woman to fly, but she was the one who really took to it the most. And she ended up stopping her flying after she had a really horrific flight and a really tough landing, and she broke her ankle, and she was pregnant with her youngest child at the time. So when she crawled out for help after that, she was like, I'm done with the whole balloon thing. Next slide. This is Barbara Keith, and Barbara was probably the first hot air balloon pilot, modern day hot air balloon pilot in the United States in the early 1960s, around 1963. I am absolutely sure she was the first woman hot air balloon pilot in New England. Next slide. So Barbara got into hot air ballooning through a circuitous way. She was a parachutist, and she belonged to a club here in Connecticut. And she and a group of her parachuting pals ended up getting interested in ballooning. She went down and flew with some gas balloonists in Pennsylvania who told her about this fledgling sport of hot air ballooning. And she was in contact with the builders of those balloons, and she and her pals bought one together as a group. And she was the one who was to get trained up and licensed and teach the rest of everyone of the group to fly. This yard, this is so incredible. It was so incredible to me. Where she's about to take off from here is like, I don't know, a mile from my house. She took off from Farmington many times from this particular yard. Unfortunately, Barbara was one of the first people lost in a hot air balloon. She took part in the Catalina to the mainland balloon race in 1964. And her chase boat left her. She ran out of fuel and she drowned at sea. And her equipment now is up at the New England Air Museum. Next slide. Okay, so we're getting close to my story here with my career starting in 1973. Next slide.
And no questions yet, but if anyone has any questions as we're transitioning, please put them in the chat.
So anyway, we talked about how a gas balloon gets inflated. That is a really, really long process. It starts in, dark 30 in the morning, and it takes a crew of, for especially one of those sandbag net balloons, it takes probably 25 people at least to get the balloon in the air. Here we are. This is a hot air balloon laid out flat. Early in the morning, you can see the sun is coming up. We do it early in the morning because it needs to be calm. We need to be up and down while it's calm. Next slide. So here we are. The balloon was flat, and now we turned on a big fan, which you can't see, it's out of the picture, and cold air inflate the whole thing to pretty fat before we start adding heat. So this crew is 2 people on the mouth holding it open, and 1 pilot at the burner, and at the top of the balloon, the crown of the balloon, is another rope that is being held until the balloon starts to stand. Okay, next slide. So here it is, standing up, ready to go on the field. So from arriving to the field to being in this position takes 20 minutes to a half an hour, much faster than a gas balloon. Okay, next slide. And here we are off and flying over the landscape. 35 minutes. Next. So this is how I got in ballooning. I met this guy here, Brian Boland. He had already built a few balloons. His first balloon was his master's thesis from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And then he moved up to Farmington, and he was the art and photography teacher at Farmington High. And the last balloon he built before I met him was a balloon with his students. It was a project, an art project for them. Next slide. This is the first time I ever went up in a balloon. I'm up in the balloon with Brian. We are out in Albuquerque at the Albuquerque Hot Air Balloon World Fiesta. And we drove out there with some ballooning pals, carrying, I don't know, 5 or 6 balloons in a trailer and in the bus. And we're planning to spend the week out at the fiesta. And so the first day we're on the field getting our stuff ready, a gentleman came up to Brian and he said, "I'm from Arkansas. I'm the only balloonist in Arkansas. I've never seen my balloon in the air. And would you fly it?" So that's how I got to go in this beautiful balloon. And we landed in a schoolyard and just before Kirkland Air Force Base, I remember. Okay, next slide. So here I am, smiling ear to ear. I have just taken my first solo flight in a one-place balloon called Fred. It's made out of Tyvek, and this is the same fabric that people wrap their houses in these days to be a barrier for air passing through, which makes it a good fabric for flying, except it melts if you look at it. So you have to be really, really careful with the burner. And this is a one-place balloon, so you can see it's a little basket. Okay, next. This is the first balloon that Brian and I built together. We built 35 hot air balloons and 1 airship. And this first one was called May Day because we finished building it on May 1st, not because there was any emergency of any kind. Next slide. This is a photo from a little balloon rally that we had here in Farmington for several years called Balloons Over Farmington. There are like 14 balloons in this photograph and 7 of them are home builds. Most of our friends in ballooning back at that time were people who built their own stuff. Next slide. So this is a little model test of an airship that we made before we were going to jump into doing the real thing. Many balloonists are fascinated also by airships, and we decided we were going to make one. So this is a prototype. Next slide. So here's the real deal. It's a 140,000 cubic foot pea green airship, which we called the Albatross. We bought the fabric. It was military surplus fabric that we bought from a fabric finisher here in Connecticut, in Putnam, Connecticut. And we probably took between 6 and 8 months to build this. It had a couple of different iterations, especially on the rudder there. And so this is in Farmington in the Meadows that I think we're just about to take off. Next one. And here's the Albatross up in the air. You can see that it has this indenture that's running just outside the spine of the airship, and there's another on the other side. Inside the balloon are 2 catenary curtains with cables hanging down from them, and those cables hold the airship car to just below the mouth of the balloon, so we can be close enough to make sure all the heat from the burner goes in. You can see there's a little engine on the back, and the engine fills that scoop to fill the rudder and also pushes the airship along. Next slide. So we did a lot of experimenting with small size balloons and different kinds of fabrics and different kinds of materials to make really, really lightweight balloons. And we decided we were going to go for some world records. So this in 1978, we were ready to do that. And this is the balloon that I was going to fly. Hot air balloons come in many different size categories. And so this one that's shown here, the little black one, is an AX1. AX2 is the next biggest, AX3, and then it goes up to like, I don't know what, AX15 or something, and then unlimited class. And so if I made the records, if I flew this balloon, I was going to get both the AX1 and the AX2 records, because no one had ever flown this size of a balloon before. That banner came off because we were, of course, trying to keep it lightweight. We did have that sponsor, and we let them know right away that banner was not going in the air. So the balloon that's behind it is about 90,000 cubic feet. It's 10 times the size of this little balloon that we're looking at now. Next slide. So here I am. I'm pretty ready to go. I'm sitting in my little bosun seat there. We're keeping the balloon warm with a auxiliary tank and burner so I don't waste fuel. And next to me on the other side is a 7-gallon propane tank. My burner is above me in a little load ring. I'm carrying a barograph it's like strapped to my chest, and that also served as the instrument pack. And the top of the balloon, I had a dial to monitor the heat in the top of the balloon. Nylon melts at just over 420 degrees. And the idea, of course, is to keep the temperature in the balloon way under that. Next slide. So here I am. I'm getting a little last minute, pointers from Brian. And you can see that to make the bosun's seat, we used a lot of parachute hardware. So it felt very safe. Next. Here I am up over the valley. I was heading south from Farmington, and you can see my feet dangling there from the bosun's seat. And the balloon that was next to me is flying behind me. I had Brian and a couple other pilots in it. So I flew down over Farmington, and I landed just off the north end of the runway at Robertson Airport, which was not developed. It was a sand pit at the time. And I landed in my brother's arms on the last gasp of fuel. Next slide. This balloon, I really love this shot of this balloon, and I still have this balloon. It's called Peaches. It was named after our cat, and it's a very small balloon for what it's doing. This is probably the smallest balloon, hot air balloon that ever flew across the Alps, from Stade in Switzerland to Torino in Italy, which Brian flew in 2.5 hours, which is really clipping along. And again, he also landed with very little fuel. The flight was 2.5 hours. The retrieve was 2.5 days. Okay, next slide. So we got to work with this really swanky, expensive group in France doing balloon tours in the couple of the wine regions, like Bordeaux and Champagne, and in the Loire River Valley. And after we did that in 1978, I said to some pals of ours, we were talking, and we said, we can do that here. And so we made a little company, and we did balloon flights in the fall for several years over in the Hudson River Valley, which is an absolutely fabulous area to fly. It's super stable for some reason, just like France was super stable. And we had a great time. And even some of the folks that we met on the Bombard Society tours came and flew with us for this. So we did that in the Hudson River Valley for a few years, and then we moved it to Farmington, which is also a lovely river valley. Next slide. Okay, so here's where a whole big change in our lives come with the adventures we're about to go through. Next slide. So in 1981, April of 1981, we got a telephone call from this gentleman, Jorge Delano, and he is the CEO and president of the largest sanitary ware manufacturing company in South America. And he has decided that he wants to learn how to fly a hot air balloon and buy a balloon. We had this 10-minute conversation. He signed up for lessons, and he ordered a balloon. And then he came up to Connecticut 4 times for a few days at a time. And by December, he had gotten his license and let us know that he wanted to do some flights in Venezuela over these really terrific landscapes, and let people know that Venezuela was not part of Africa in his promotion endeavors here with his hot air balloons. So next slide. So the first place that he had chosen for us was Angel Falls, which is deep in the jungle in central Venezuela. And he had to get all kinds of permissions to do this. He also had to buy another balloon because the original balloon he bought was too small to carry all that he wanted to do. He wanted to film it. He wanted to have extra person go, and this and that. So we took 2 balloons down to fly over Angel Falls. And so here we are in the canyon, just about ready to take off. Next slide. So here, this is the smaller balloon. That's Jorge and I are flying in that balloon. Brian stayed down closer to the river for a bit longer and actually got a better landing spot than we did. But we all landed up on that Tepui, which is the flat top mountains called the Tepui in this area, behind the falls. Next slide. So the next one, from the Tepui in the jungle, we went to the high mountains, the Andes Mountains, start along the Colombian and Venezuelan border. And so we have these balloons set up at 15,000 feet. And the idea is to fly off and over to the left side of the photograph. I think you can see that there's quite a steep drop down to the valley below. And the idea was to fly over this little ridge here and go out over the valley and drop down. Simple. But it was darn calm there. It was unbelievably calm. And you had to go to 20,000 feet to get a bit of a drift. Jorge and I could not get to 20,000 feet in that small balloon. It was just got too hot inside, but Brian got over that little ridge. He had a cameraman and a kind of a local with him to help him speak to whoever he landed at, whoever showed up when he landed. So anyway, we did not get to fly over it, but it was still pretty spectacular. Our crew was our crew from the Angel Falls flight, and also we had an Andean rescue team with us, which was really, really helpful. Next slide. So from the mountains, we went out to the big water. There's a archipelago of about, I don't know, 100 and something little islands and islets off the northern coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean. And Jorge wanted to fly in that area. And he, I don't know, procured this LST because he decided, because it was so windy out there, that it would be better to be able to use a big boat like this, have it turn into the wind and crank up its engines and go as fast as it possibly could to make it kind of calm down the wind, so we could inflate the balloon. We had hoped to do 2 balloons, but it was just too complicated. We had a lot of problem. The captain of the ship was really freaked out by the whole thing. So we put up the 1 balloon, and Jorge, Brian, and I took off from it and flew downwind and landed on one of the skinny islands out there. Okay, next slide. So this was quite a thing. We're again back in the jungle, and in this area is a mountain, a Tepui flat top mountain that's called Sari-Sari-Nyama. And in the top of this are several sinkholes, and one of them is the largest, deepest sinkhole on the planet. It's 1,000 feet across and 1,100 feet deep. And Jorge wanted to fly, again, the 2 balloons out of the sinkhole. So here we are, we're transporting the equipment out there. The crew came in, were picked up from the end of the last dirt road and came in 2 helicopters. We had this helicopter, the Guacamaya, and another one, same size. But the DC-3 was used to bring in the heavy equipment, the balloon equipment, but it couldn't land. It's a grass strip there, and nobody lands an airplane that size out there, because if you could see the river, you could see the carcass of a DC-3 that really didn't do very well. So parachute guys loaded up the baskets with all the balloon equipment, the balloons, the tanks, the burners, and attached cargo chutes to them. And as the DC-3 was flying over the big open space, you can see there to the left where the airstrip is, they pushed them out. And then the parachute team jumped out over the same spot, so that was their ride in. And they have been part of our crew before this. So, and now everybody was gathered on the grass strip with the equipment. Okay, next slide. So this photograph is showing the conveyance that we were going to use to get down to the bottom of the sinkhole that is hanging from one of the helicopters. And that's me in there. I'm ready to go down, and we had to clear a place at the bottom of the sinkhole to stretch the balloon out. We were hoping again for 2 balloons, so we were going to send a crew down to chop out space Next slide. So here's the chopper heading down into the sinkhole. You can see people in the basket, in the net there. So we had like 2 or 3 trips with maybe 6 or 7 people got down to the bottom of the sinkhole to make this little spot for the balloon to lie out. And while we were doing it, we realized we were not going to be able to do 2 balloons. It's just the huge rock rubble down there was just too difficult to get around. So we just made 1 space for 1 balloon. Next slide. So I don't know if you can see it, but way down in the bottom, you can see a little bit of the balloon stretched out there. The other balloon we had on the side of the rim so that we could kind of meet each other in the air. The inflation down there went really, really well. They couldn't spread the balloon out. They had to just, we took a fan down and they were able to cold air inflate it enough to stand it up. And the top of the rim was kind of problematic. It had a real weird crosswind, but I finally got that balloon to stand up. And we did get in the air, but it was just such a crazy set of circumstances. And we just didn't have very long flights, but the balloon did fly out of the sinkhole. Okay, next slide. This is the crew. Here we are. We're back at the airstrip and the native village there. We did put a balloon up in the village and we offered tethered rides to whoever wanted to go from the village. Mostly we got kids, not very many adults were interested in going in the balloon. Next slide. So this is the last flight of the series we did for this particular venture. And it was at Los Merinos de Coro, which are the sand dunes. It's a national park along the coast of Venezuela on the western coast. And it was kind of a real respite from jungle stuff and crazy water stuff and Andes mountain stuff. And the flights were very fast, of course, very windy there, but at least we could see where we could land because you can see it's really quite open. We had very nice but fast flights, fast landings. Next slide. So all these flights that we just looked at and a couple of more that weren't in this presentation were made into a movie called Above the Lost World, and it was shown on Discovery for about 5 years. They bought the rights to it. And so Jorge made his goal of showing off his country, promoting his company and enjoying his balloons. Next slide. So now we're getting into my own company. I started my own company, Cat Balloons, in 1985. It was a full service hot air balloon company. Next slide. This is a drawing painting thing I did years and years ago, showing there's no difference between building a balloon and repairing a balloon. You are just surrounded by mountains of fabric and having to drag it through the neck of that sewing machine. It's really, my back hurts just looking at this photo. But anyway, I had a repair station. So I did annual inspections and 100-hour inspections. I did repairs. I didn't build any more balloons once I started my own company. Fixing them and inspecting them was enough for me. Next slide. So here I am. I'm part of the inspections for balloons for the annuals. Are doing fabric testing, and I'm doing a poundage test. I can't even remember now what the poundage was I had to pull to be sure the fabric was strong, but you also had to do a porosity test. The top of the balloon always had all these little heat tabs up till you had to check to see that none of those were tripped, and if they were, you had to replace them. Every gore, every piece of fabric had to be looked over, just like any aircraft, very, very thorough, and replacing stuff that was broken or not working properly or problematic. Next. Next slide. So here's an early morning in my backyard. We're getting ready for a charter flight, most likely with 2 balloons. Me and my brother both flew for cat balloons. And so it looks like we're getting ready to take off on a early morning. Next flight. Next slide. Here's a bunch of my brochures from over the years. I had fun making them. I like doing graphic stuff. So every few years I'd make a new brochure. Next slide. I got to be an examiner for lighter than air, hot air balloons, commercial and private. And so I could add that to my repertoire of things that I could offer through cat balloons. Next slide. I got invited to be a pilot on a commemorative tour of a hero called Tadeusz Kosciuszko. He was instrumental in the Revolutionary War as a military engineer here in the United States. He was very close with Thomas Jefferson. He was an engineer at the Battle of Saratoga. At West Point, he did all the ramparts there. So we visited all the places he was important during the Revolution with this balloon that was built for the Polish people. And after the flights in the United States, we took the balloon to Poland. Next slide. And flew in all the places that he was instrumental in Poland as they did great battle with Catherine the Great of Russia. You can see the balloon has a portrait of Kosciuszko on it, and it had a lot of imagery, that Polish imagery on it that was special. Okay, next slide. So because I was a dealer for Cameron balloons and Disney bought their balloons from Cameron Balloons, I was lucky to be called when they came up to the Hartford area, because they took these Disney balloons on tour and took them to children's hospitals. And so I got to fly in this one as a pilot here in Connecticut. And as you can see, he's wearing his birthday hat. This is his 60th birthday. And that balloon was fondly called by the crew the rat with the hat, because they had so many balloons and so many Mickey balloons. Okay, next slide. Again, I was invited down to Florida to fly in this balloon rally, to fly this Burger King balloon. So I went down to take part in that. And it was a competition flying. I didn't really do that very much, and I didn't do very well at it. But one of the mornings I landed right next to a Burger King. So I thought I did my job. Next slide. This is a hot air airship, not built by us. It was built by Cameron Balloons. And we call anything that was not home built, we called store-bought, with a kind of a little stain. And this is down in Chile. I was co-piloting with a Chilean pilot. And we actually flew over downtown Santiago, which I was absolutely flabbergasted that we could do this. But the pilot was a former Chilean Air Force pilot, and I'm sure he radioed that we were going to be flying over the city. Next slide. Here I am flying over Valle de Tuy in Venezuela. It's south of Caracas, a couple hours, and that's Jorge with me. This is just a regular flight above the clouds, but you can see the sucker hole there, and we're going to go through that. Okay, next slide. So here's what turned out to be our last balloon flight down in Venezuela. We were going to be flying off the top of that kind of tree trunk looking mountain over there. And it was very intriguing to Jorge. It's in the southwestern part of the country, very close to the Colombian border. And it's got caves that go through it. It's called a sacred mountain because of the native peoples who live around there, who have a legend that calls this mountain the remains of the tree of life that was destroyed. I forgot for why, but all the fruits of the earth, all the fruits of that tree fed the people around that lived around that mountain. Okay, next slide. So here we are. We got the balloons up onto the top of that by helicopter, and it took us a couple days, but we finally got the weather to fly the balloons. So I'm flying the one on the right, and my brother Bill, me and Jorge are flying the one on the right, and my brother Bill is flying the one that's a little bit lower. So again, this is in jungle territory. So we flew for about 2.5 hours, and we were miles and miles apart from each other. But in the end, we found what Bill always called this somewhat clear area, landed here, and with our envelopes touching. I mean, it was just unbelievable that we ended up smack dab in the same spot. You can't see Bill's balloon because it's not quite as clear as he said it was. All right, next slide. So this, we brought our equipment into the Autana area on the Autana River, and we brought it in 3 bongos. But at the end of this trip, we had to lash these bongos together because we had an incident with that helicopter, and we needed to create an aircraft carrier. I mean, you can see the 2 balloon baskets on one of them, of the bongos, and then the helicopter's fuselage is sticking out on the front of the other ones, and its rotors are inside. Next slide. So here we are, we're over in Britain now. We're taking hot air airship lessons because we are going to get our UK licenses. I mean, Jorge decided he wanted to fly an airship in another part of the country, down near the Brazilian border called the Roraima. And so because we were flying in Venezuela, he wanted everybody to have a license for the aircraft. And the United States does not give a license for hot air airships. That license goes with hot air balloons. So we went to Britain to train up and get our licenses in Britain, and Jorge ordered the airship. Next slide. So while we had the airship in Connecticut, I had banners made so I could fly around and advertise my company before we took the ship down to Venezuela. Next slide. So here it is. We're flying off from the Cat Balloon Port out over the meadows. Next slide. And here again is, the backyard. Most of the balloonists in the area would come in and fly off of our field. And it was really, it was just really fun. We had a great time. Everybody, we'd always meet back at the field afterwards and, hang our talk and all that. And in the lower right picture, you can see that it sure looks like we set up the airship because the snow melted is all around the area there. Next slide. Here I am with my mom and my little boy Ross, who is now 36 years old. And here he is at the burner, nothing on. Nothing on, he's just, pulling on the, anyway, so for 10 years, I was in a program that I thought was really great. It was FAA Accident Prevention Program. And I was a counselor with that for, like I said, about 10 years. And it was a national program. And I don't know why they ended up shutting it down, but I was really happy to be a part of it. There were a lot of pilots from all different disciplines in aviation, and I really it was really great. Next slide. So I got surprised one year, and I was named the Counselor of the Year for the Accident Prevention Group, and here I am receiving my my plaque. Next slide. So here it is. They even put a balloon on it, which I was really impressed. And then the one next to it is an award I got a few years ago now, for 40 years of accident-free flying in hot air balloons, and it was from the Balloon Federation of America. Next slide. And this is the last balloon that we sold when I finished up the business. It was my favorite balloon. It was very, very fun to fly. It was small, lightweight, and really good looking in the sky. So that's it. The highlights, some of the highlights of my time as a hot air balloonist. And I mean, I just couldn't have asked for a better career to have fallen into, which I did. I fell into. I was a lucky, lucky person.
Well, thank you. You did receive some questions as we were going through all these incredible photos. Going back to the first time you showed the airship, which I think was around the Kodak pictures or maybe a little bit before. Someone was asking what year was that?
The Kodak one or the one that we built?
The airship one, not the.
There were two airship ones.
Yeah, the first one you did.
The Albatross was built in 1975. No,
Oh.
so those were the first inflations and flights of it in 1975.
Okay, and then someone asked, was the airship hot air?
Yes.
Okay. And then another question, how long does it take to make a balloon? Do you build all your own or buy parts, and from where? A balloon store?
No, the only thing that we had to buy parts for was the burner. We just looked around for configurations that we could make into balloon burners. And then as there became to be balloon burners around that were used, we would buy those. But we cut and sewed the entire envelope of every balloon. We wove the baskets. We soaked the wicker in our bathtub for a month as we were making the balloon baskets. The airship one was a lot of wicker for that basket. So that was probably a couple months in the, of the bathtub being full of wicker. So the balloons would take about a month, 8 weeks, something like that. The airship took us somewhere between 6 and 8 months to do.
Okay. Someone noticed that your examiner certificate had the word him on it.
Oh, yeah, come on, it was 1980.
I know, tough sign of the times. How old were you when you flew out of the sinkhole?
Oh my goodness, when was that? Was 19? I don't know, 32 or something like that. I started when I was 22 years old.
How much control does the pilot have over where to land?
Well, so when you're flying along in a balloon, you're really observing what is happening on the ground. You can, if there is some kind of smoke coming out of a chimney, or as you're going, different altitudes in the balloon, you're seeing what directions you're going. You get a report from flight service about the wind direction at different altitudes. But of course, when you're landing, you're going to be affected by tree lines, by rivers, by water bodies. So it is tricky. You can, when you're flying a balloon, you're kind of always looking at what your options could be. And you could be right on for a field or a landing spot, and you could miss it at the last minute. The wind changes for some little reason. So, I've never not found a landing spot, obviously, but I remember flying with my 2-year-old son, thinking I was going to get into this field, and he's looking out the little window foot where you could put your foot in to climb over the basket, and he says, "Mama, you're going to miss this field," and I did. I was flabbergasted, but I went up high and I could come back around and try again. So I made it the second time.
Okay. And again, I have a few more questions left to go, but if anyone has more, just put them in the chat. How long does it take to fill the balloon with air?
A hot air balloon, once you get to the field, and you lay the balloon out, you cold air fill it, and that takes, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes maybe. And then when you add the heat to the balloon, that stands up within 2 minutes.
Okay.
If everything's nice, if you have a nice calm day. If it's windy, you're wrestling with a balloon.
Okay. And how much does an average flight cost?
When we started flying, I think we were charging $100 a person. If you go online now to book a balloon flight, you're going to pay somewhere between $275 to $350 a person.
Okay. And hey, Doug. Doug asked, where was the burner in the small balloons?
Where was
Where was the burner in the smaller balloons that you had?
it was hanging below the envelope under the mouth, just like any other balloon. Yeah.
Okay. And you have several thank yous, and many people did comment on how beautiful the pictures are.
Yeah, they are. It's amazing. Yeah, it's wonderful to relive the things that I got to do. So thanks for inviting me.
Okay, before we close and say goodnight, I just wanted to thank you, Kathy. That was such an adventure. Thank you for enlightening us on ballooning. It was really wonderful. Also, as I'd like to invite everyone for our upcoming March webinar. We're featuring 4 guest speakers that are involved in volunteer flying to save lives, saving human lives and saving lives of pets. We'll learn more about the 3 different programs, Pilots and Paws, as well as PALS and Angel Flights. So that will be March 8th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Good night. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.